Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 69. Today we're going to talk about how you learn. And is the way we learn the best way to learn? Let's find out. Welcome, everybody, to Chaps Many Cultures. How are we doing, Mr. Brett?
I'm doing very well, very, very well. I'm just laying around doing nothing here.
Yeah, he is.
That's all I'm doing.
He's by the way, those of you who are not in the intercultural field, there's a conference going on right now in the U.S. It's a virtual conference, and Brett over there is basically the mastermind behind it. We're just pulling out of that real quick. We're going to be right back, but it's important stuff we're doing here, right? We're talking about learning, how learning is different today than it was when your grandparents taught you a few things. And we brought with us today for this episode somebody who specializes in learning. I'm going to let him explain what he does. Welcome with us to the Two Chaps Many Cultural Tower Studios, Dr. Stephen Goss, who is assistant professor for education at Kennesaw State University. How are you doing, Steve?
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here today. I love your topic. It really jumped off at me when I heard what you were thinking about doing today. So I'm so happy to be here and to talk to y'all.
So fantastic.
Steve, we named the episode Sociocultural Learning, the power of sociocultural learning. That's a big word, and we're going to unpack that in a little bit. The reason why we decided to have this conversation today is because you and I, we talked about in the past how the way I learned as a kid in elementary and high school and later in university, and the way you learned, there were some differences in that the way you instruct the new generations of teachers is, again, a different iteration from what most of us experienced when they were younger. So how you grew up in upstate New York, correct?
Exactly, yes, New York State.
How was your high school experience and maybe your college experience? How were you taught?
So for me, most of my learning was about preparing, reading, studying, and then just showing what I had learned. So it was basically a lot of rote memorization and skill-based testing, and just trying to just give me information. This teacher would give a bunch of information. It was my job to memorize that information and then be able to regurgitate it somewhere else, put it on a page, answer a multiple choice test. And all of it was geared towards these high-stake tests, these big tests that wound up at the end of different years of high school or even middle school. So the whole thing was geared to help me achieve on just one particular skill set, one type of exam, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I basically grew up being expected to do. And a lot of people in the U.S. Have similar experiences, high stakes tests, and then the curriculum itself ends up being designed to help students do well on those high stakes tests. And the curriculum is less concerned with the actual students themselves.
Right.
So that is a huge issue. And when I was in high school, I would get tested and get IQ tests and things like that. And they would call my parents in and say, you know, Mr. and Mrs. Gosh, your son is really smart according to these tests, and yet his grades really suck. Like, what is going on here? And what was going on was I hated school. I couldn't stand it. I thought it was filled, a lot of my teachers I would see as charlatans who would tell us to, live life to your fullest and things like that. And yet here we were taking notes, and we were never really asked what our own personal thoughts were on a topic. All of our own personal, who we were, what we were thinking was like, you can ask me about that after class, or, come to me during my office hours and we'll talk. And it was never part of the actual classroom content.
Right. So that sounds similar to the way I was taught or educated in the German school system was a lot of frontal lecturing, right? There was this authority figure at the front of the room, usually at a chalkboard or maybe a whiteboard, but there was this, I'm old enough to remember chalkboards, right? There was this green area at the front of the room, and there was a teacher who either sat or was standing up, and they were lecturing to many. So it was from one to many, and then there would be, he or she would call upon us in the room, say, okay, Christian, what do you think? Or what's your answer? Or Stephanie, what's your answer? And occasionally somebody would be brought up to the chalkboard to write something down. I did never really experience a group conversation, a group dialogue that would allow new insights to come up from within the room. So it sounds a bit similar to your situation. Brett, how was it in Australia growing up when you went to school? What was your situation like?
It was very similar. It was a lot of rule-based, test-based, and authoritarianism, that harkens back. I really like. I've been a great follower of Seth Godin, and Seth Godin talks a lot about the averaging of education and how it doesn't really. It's not designed to produce people that are innovative thinkers and that kind of thing, because it basically was an industrial machine. I mean, education was an industrial machine. And whenever he talks about that, I think about Stephen, I just absolutely agree with you. I hated school. It was the best thing I ever did, was to leave school. It wasn't that I think I'm particularly not intelligent, but it's just that the structure didn't suit me. It doesn't mean that the structure doesn't suit other people. But I didn't think the structure suited me. So I'm always interested in new ways of learning and new ways of expanding a curriculum or expanding an experience for a diverse set of, whether it be culture, whether it be upbringing, a diverse set of the ways of being educated.
Yeah, and Brett, our educational system actually came from a military background in Prussia, where they were educating people, following a bell schedule, moving from place to place. And once industry, like you said, the industrial model came up, people needed people trained, and they just borrowed from that military model. And we still are following, sitting kids in rows, having the teacher stand up in the front of the classroom. All of those were passed down from the 17th and 18th century Prussian models.
So the Prussian, so it's the Germans' fault again. Oh, right. I own it.
You got so much to answer for, my friend, and it's all on you.
It's on me. And you saw Marta Novica. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right. She said it is the same. It's the same in Poland. So, so when education was shaped, the way we know education was shaped by societal needs, right? It was to develop the obedient follower of commands, or the functioning employee in an industrial work environment. So people were put in boxes so they could go to a box every day to build a box, and then when they fall over and die, they're going to be put in a box in a hole in the ground. So I'm oversimplifying. So,
very dystopian. You're making me depressed.
Well, and I did not necessarily hate school. However, I saw the limitation of that type of interaction. Now, even though I saw the limitation of this one-to-many approach, and this putting people in rows and making them the recipients of the outpouring of some guru-type figure in front of the room, I think it depends on which culture we're from, whether we accept that or whether we challenge that. I saw a comment earlier today on LinkedIn where somebody that follows this program occasionally shared her experience of being studying now in Denmark as opposed to her native culture, Germany. By the way, two countries that are neighbors, for those of you who have to look that up on the map. So she went up north to experience a learning environment there, and she recognizes that it's completely different, that that students are challenging the instructor, that they are having these conversations, and she wasn't used to that. So is this simply a cultural aspect of learning, or is this the new school of teaching, Steve? How would you, in your experience, what's the answer here?
I think part of it is definitely cultural at this point. I mean, it's really embedded in these different places, and students from a very early age learn how to respond to adults when adults ask questions or when they're just talking to adults in general. So there's definitely those cultural aspects. But I do think on a fundamental level, if you wipe away schools and they never existed, humans are always learning. And when we learn, it's always social. So like things like literacy are social activities at their core. We write things down because there's someone else out there that's waiting for our words or numbers or whatever it is that we created. They need to see it. In schools, we just love to strip that audience, the social part away. And we really just, a lot of teachers and a lot of schools would prefer if the students could just magically come in, just their brains, like just have their brains come in and sit down and behave. And they don't care about the rest of that human, their bodies, anything else having to do with that person. And they just want that brain ready to download information. And the reality is all humans, no matter where we are, we grow up and we have experiences from the time we're just in the womb until we enter school for that first time, and usually 5 or 6 years old. We have a whole store of experiences that have built up. And yet when you come into that first grade to kindergarten or first grade, whatever grade it is, the teachers act as if you know nothing about the world and that you're deficient, and that they are the ones, you said guru, they're the ones that have that really good knowledge. And if the kid's well behaved and studies and does all the things they need to do, if they're lucky, the teacher will deposit that knowledge into the brain of those students. We call that the banking model of education. And that is the traditional way that kind of education, especially here in the US, has been seen as this banking model. The kids are ignorant and we need to fix them up and help them kind of shape up and get all that knowledge in their head so they can do something later in their life.
Right.
But the reality is they come in with all these good experiences, and from a sociocultural standpoint, what the good teachers do is understand that knowledge, value it, and say, what you have learned is really important. I want to take what you already know, I want to draw it out, I want to look at it and talk about it, and then connect it to this other information that you need to learn as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens then is they're thinking about themselves, thinking about their own experiences. It's on the front of their mind. And then when that new idea, that new concept comes up, they're able to get their fingers and their brain into it quicker. And then that is deeper, real learning, where they're constantly they learn a concept and then they're comparing it to their own experiences. And they're welcome to do that by the teacher. The teacher is asking for that. And it's constantly drawing out those experiences and upholding, like the really good examples. The teacher will say, look at what this person has been through, what they experienced, and
Right.
look at how that relates to the novel we're reading or whatever thing that we're trying to teach. And, you know, I talk a lot about schools and colleges, but I also have experience in the corporate world as well. And the corporate world's even worse down this rabbit hole of the banking model. Like you come in for training and they're just like, understand this information. And they're not asking the people about their own experiences, even if it seems unrelated. Like you're sitting there to learn how to call on a telephone at a bank. It's still important to bring in the person somehow, some way. It's the responsibility of the teacher to be probing and finding and helping those people understand how their experience might inform what they're learning.
So this is super insightful. So this sociocultural concept, or the idea of sociocultural learning, I think goes back to psychologist Lev Vygotsky, right? So what, 1930s Russian psychologist, was kind of his information or his insights were kind of buried in Stalin, Soviet Union. So his information erupted after the Soviet Union kind of loosened up around these concepts a little bit.
Yeah.
So what do we tell instructors and teachers that come from cultures that are not necessarily trusting of that crowd wisdom, so to say. So when we look at teaching models that we see to this present day in many Asian cultures, China would be the biggest behemoth in that area, where rote memorization is still often the default of how students are taught and how they learn. How can these modern teaching concepts be spread across the world, or does it work in cultures outside of North America or the Western white European context? Is this something that is limited to us, or do you see this being applied elsewhere?
I really see it being potentially applied elsewhere. Again, I think it's basic human kind of things where we, how we really truly learn is really different than actually the school settings that we're put in, no matter where we are. However, I do understand what you're saying here. As far as these places where rote memorization is still really valued, I think just a small amount of this sociocultural aspect will make a big difference. And I think little by little over time, as teachers adopt this, I think as the next generation, if you have a little bit when you're learning, when you are going through, you have some of this sociocultural experience. When those people then become teachers, I do think that they will tend to adopt more sociocultural practices. Mm-hmm. So I think that a little bit kind of makes sense. Like when you start seeing it in classrooms, it's hard to deny the power. But again, if you have an entire model that's been going on for decades or centuries in a certain way, change happens really slow. It's like this slow plodding dinosaur, but just a little bit of those connections, even as just starting a class and asking students, how are you today? Makes a difference. Not every teacher does that. You'd be surprised. I observe lots of teachers and they just right now, all right, look on the board, start copying your notes, and that's how class starts without those basic human kind of connections, right? And I've found that if students don't know me, they don't know about me, and they don't think I know about them, they're not going to learn anything from me. And that's really, maybe that's an American kind of idea, where students are like, give you the middle finger if you don't really pay attention to them. But I think it's kind of a basic human need that we kind of are seeing, and you're human, you're here. I thank you for being here, that kind of thing, and not just treat it as something coming in and someone that like a bank, a piggy bank for your deposit and object.
Right. Dr. Joel Brown has been a guest on this show, and we've had a lot of interaction with him, describes how he invites students into a lecture hall when he teaches, and he's taught all over the world, and he is playing music, he's kind of sitting there, and oftentimes they will come in there and go, are you the professor? It's like, are you really the professor? And he says, yeah, this is me, but I'm not really the professor. I'm just here. I'm the facilitator. I'm here to help you learn however you want. And I thought that was a great way of doing it. And also somebody else I followed, Ben Zander, who is, well advanced in age, and but as the director of the Boston Philharmonic, he is often called on to teach university courses and applies his experience as a conductor of one of the most accomplished orchestras in the world, to say that I've actually seen a video of him sitting in front of a bunch of professors and say, when students come into my lecture class for the very first time, I tell them they've all passed. Everybody's got an A. Everybody's got their degree. Don't worry. Pressure's off. But then he says to them, now all you have to do that is to write me a letter and tell me, how are you? And what are you going to do from your own perspective? How are you going to live into the promise of this passing grade that you're going to get? That's flipping. And you can hear a collective gasp in that audience. Goes, my God, we're supposed to be the boss, and we're not going to let them run that. And he says, no, you're reversing it. You're saying, I believe in you as a human being, your experience, your background, your upbringing, and you have to bring that as an individual to my class, and that's how we're going to learn together. and the information that we exchange is going to facilitate that. And I think it's a whole complete different way of looking at things. So
Right.
how would you respond to that, Stephen? If somebody says, you know, like, I'm just going to give everyone an A to start with, it kind of makes your job sound good, easy, doesn't it?
I say the exact thing almost every semester. It's everyone in this room has a 100%, an A. It's perfect, right? And now you just need to keep doing the things just to keep it up. But you already have it. I want to give you an A+. I want to give you 100%. And let's just do it together. Communicate with me. Let's be in lockstep. You can do this. And that's how I like to just position them right from the start. It's not a you have a 0 and you have to earn a 100. It's you have 100. You need to maintain that. You are good. You are a good person. What you have experienced is valuable. Let's bring it in here and let's all go together and do it together. And I just need you to do the things that you need to do to pass the course, which, you know, it's just a different positioning and it's a different kind of stance. It's just, you know, instead of looking at my students as lacking, I'm looking at them as being really great and having good information, and they just have to keep it up and draw it out and do the things that I ask.
But doesn't that also imply to a certain degree that we share this culture of authority and posture and position by mutual agreement, so that we as a group find it okay that the teacher is a peer or is maybe a more advanced peer among equals? However, if you're from a culture in which hierarchy is ascribed, right, their authority is ascribed, by definition, you're the paternal figure of the family, or you're the top of the pyramid in an organization, and therefore, by default, you are the one that everybody's turning to because you hold that power, you hold that authority. So in those cultures, that this approach that I find very endearing might be a bit more challenging. Have you had students in your class, Stephen, that came from backgrounds where they found that challenging to adopt this model?
Yeah, I've had a few different students that have been taken aback as far as my stance as a teacher, but I will tell you, I'm always in this authoritative role some way, right? I like to kind of position myself as executive producer in this kind of classroom, where I'm not the director. I'm not directing every thought and every idea, and I'm not creating the images or the poems that they're writing or whatever it is they're doing in my class. I am just orchestrating the flow of that energy and the activities, making sure things are going in a productive direction. But I'm also kind of listening to the students and adjusting that direction based on what they're saying, what they're doing, and what I know that they need. And I'm collecting data on them, and I'm doing things that traditional teachers do. You know, there's still tests and papers, and I'm looking through that information to try to inform what we're going to do next. But I am not directing every moment. I'm not telling students how they should understand a text very often, right? We read something, it's really up to their own personal interpretations, and then helping them develop those interpretations with evidence and real stuff for me, from text and from the world that I'm doing. But again, it's that executive producer role. It's not I'm not a dictator, or I'm not the main center of the classroom. They're like all directors, or they're working together to direct something, and I am the producer. I am just, all right, are we on budget? You know, is anyone?
I like this. I like this metaphorical way of looking at it quite a lot, because it brings, to me, at least in my understanding, the way I absorb what you're telling us here is it brings it full circle, right? So the Prussian model that you described, and we all agree that it's my personal fault that German teaching models prevail. But joking aside, the German teaching model, or the Central European teaching model, I would include France with that as well, the Cartesian logic, the way we develop new findings, is often, at least from my cultural background, has always been described as this humanistic way of teaching. It's this looking back at the cradle of our European societies, and that would be ancient Rome, and even further back, ancient Greece. And yet we don't teach, well, the traditional methods don't teach like the ancient Greeks did. I'm reminded of a Socratic quote that I don't remember it verbatim, but it goes something like, Socrates apparently said, I cannot teach anybody anything. all I can do is make them think.
Mhm.
Right. So you're not telling people what to think. You're not telling them how to interpret the new information, how to make meaning. You're simply facilitating their learning. You wake up their minds, or you boot their processor and now let them do the work themselves. Right.
Exactly, exactly. And that's not to say that I'm not dropping dimes of information for them, and important facts. And it's not to say that there's not rote memorization going on in my class. It's just not the basic way that we're operating from. So I'm constantly putting on them. It's their responsibility to do the thinking. And it's my responsibility, though, to ignite that curiosity, to get their brain going. One of the scholars that I really look up to says to create a hot wire connection between the student, their background, and the content. So how do we make that hot connection, right? So make the sparks happen, That's what I'm always thinking about, is how to help them do that. And I am constantly sending the message, like a metacognitive kind of message about what learning is in and of itself, that they're not performing for me. It's not about me. It's about them. It's about their minds that they're going to be carrying with them the rest of their lives. And making sense of their experiences, making sense of future experiences that will happen to them, as well as the course content itself.
That's awesome. How do we, Brett and myself and others in our industry who we mostly work with grown-ups in our work, how do we apply some of these methods? Obviously, we've done so a little bit in the past, and yet I can only speak for myself. I'm not speaking for Brett, who's a master. I'm still learning. I'm still improving. So what would be some takeaways? And for those of us who are watching here, what would be some takeaways? How can we make our facilitation, our coaching, our teaching, our training a little bit more sociocultural?
I think the big thing for me, I have a little poster above my desk that says, learning is a social activity. So learning is a social activity, and it's a mantra in my mind. Whenever I'm thinking about running a conference or facilitating to a group of people or a classroom or a business, I'm always thinking about how can I make the activities I want the students to do, or the knowledge that they need to access, how can I make aspects of it social? And that begins with how I start off my presentation. I always let the people know who I am, why I'm an expert, and then also that I live an actual real life. Like, I'm not just this talking head or some suit, but I usually in my PowerPoint will have pictures of myself with my dog and my kids, at least just one, just to make that, hey, I'm a person, and I think you are too. And then as soon as I can, I start asking them about their experiences. And that's just to start a class. Again, even if you have a group, you're training a group of people, day after day, just by asking, how was last night? Does anyone have any stories to tell about blah, blah, blah? Instead of just going right to the manual that you have to go through as part of the training, right? Because I've been there before, but just those few little human elements. And then if you're trying to get them to develop some sort of knowledge, I always want my students to be putting stuff on walls. I think we've gotten better at that, poster presentations, using Post-its, different ways to actually let the students know you're going to create something, and I'm not just going to get it and give you a grade. You're going to create it, and then everyone else is going to see it. And it's usually that everyone else will see it that is the big motivating factor. If they know there's an audience, that usually will supersede a grade or my thumbs up or whatever it is. Motivation comes from, oh, damn, a lot of people might see this. It better be good. Most people don't want to throw a piece of crap up on the wall, even if it is about, some new computer program that they had to learn for work. They still usually will take pride and make it becomes more real and more important. And then others then learn from what they created. And that's when real magical things happen, is when a student creates something, puts it up, and then everyone else is using that as a resource. So you're in a training seminar and someone makes a cheat sheet and you're like, look at this cheat sheet, it's amazing. And then you make copies of it and they all have it on their desk next to their office. I mean, that's like what I really, that's great. Like, that's a real working thing that a student created.
Mm-hmm. Nice. We have a comment here that basically reflects some of the thoughts we had earlier, where Gretel says power distance, level of hierarchy, authority, respect. Well, no, it disappeared. Here it is. 2020 is getting a shortcut to change in how we did in the past, and learning is about a dynamic social activity online or in class. Excellent. So the audience has understood. That's awesome. That's what we wanted. Yeah,
we have inspired them. That's
wait, what was that? Do that again.
My little pig sound maker.
And that is to anchor in a learning, I'm suspecting.
That, you know, someone says something in class, I just bring this out, and I mean, you bring the pig out, and people are like, "What is that?" You have their attention instantly, right? So I have a lot of little sound makers, and these are just facilitating. You know, because my class, this is a little ocarina I have. I don't know how to blow. Here it is. But because you know, when you're doing these social things, that means you want to break people up and have them talking and discussing. But you have to have their attention at different points. So I have these different methods for getting their attention.
I want to go back to school, Brett. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born too early. I always say that, you know. That'd be fun. Yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about Ben Zander, and I know that it was when I first came across him, and he said to me, I realized at 45, fairly late in life, right? He realized at 45 that as a conductor, he had no power at all unless he could inspire possibility in his players. That's a whole different way of looking in the world, right? That is looking at it and saying, I am absolutely, you know, he jokes, he says, my picture is on the CD cover, but none of my power exists unless I can inspire what is possible within the people that play in this and play together and work together. So, and I think back to your original point, Stephen, about it being a basic human need to feel that connectedness. And yes, culture plays a part, but at the depths of culture, it can still get to that very basic human need of connection and having somebody believe in you from the get-go that you can actually do it and inspire you to do so.
Exactly. And letting that person know that their background is important. So no matter what their life was like as growing up, no matter what happened, it's important. And too often, I think teachers kind of shut that out and say, yeah, your experience was, you know, not normal or weird or whatever it was, just not what is typical. And that sends a message to the student that kind of like their background, you know, they're not important as people. And unless they learn at school, then they will have value. But if they don't, they're going to be, you know, worthless humans out there somehow, which is just total crap. It's just not true.
All of you are amazing humans out there. Yeah. You guys got this. You get an A+ from the three of us. You get 100%, and you'll do just fine. Just send in your progress report, and we'll give you some feedback on it. We'll make sure you always keep that A+ level. Two chaps, many cultures. We learned so much today. Awesome, Steve. Thanks for taking time. Great point. I love the pig. I need to be one of those. Send me the order link later. I want to get that. So, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 69 is in the can. Thank you very much. We'll see you all again. When, Brett? Tomorrow, maybe?
Yeah, sometime then. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This was amazing. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate it. Bye now.
Bye, Brett. Bye.